It was almost midnight when Elias found the infant, wrapped in a faded green jacket, left in a cardboard box just outside the intake shelter where he worked the overnight shift. Rain had soaked through the edges of the blanket. The child didn't cry. He just blinked up, silently, as if the world had already shown him enough. Elias stood motionless, heart racing, drenched not by the rain but by the memories it summoned. 5 years earlier, he had stood in a similar rainstorm, holding a duffel bag and nothing else. His mother's voice still echoed in his ears, sharp and final. "Get out, I don't want a gay son." He was 17, gay, and officially alone. He remembered clutching that same green jacket, the only one he owned, and walking into the night like a ghost. Now here he was, 22, cradling a life someone else had deemed disposable. The system moved fast. Reports were filed. The child, unnamed, undocumented, was given a number, then a crib, then a schedule. But something inside Elias rebelled. This wasn't just a child from the system, this was a child from the storm, and Elias knew storms. He filed a petition. The process was long, bitter, and stacked against someone young, single, and with no blood ties. But Elias had persistence, the kind only built through abandonment. He named the child Rowan, not because of any special meaning, but because the name sounded like a second chance. In time, they formed a rhythm. Elias worked nights and napped during the day while Rowan slept beside him in a second-hand crib. There was no money for babysitters, no family to call for help, no grandparent visits or surprise gifts from uncles. There was only Elias and Rowan, and the quiet understanding that they had no one but each other. Then one morning, as Elias was making powdered formula by instinct alone, his phone buzzed. An unknown number, a hesitant voice. "Elias, it's me, your mother." Silence. She wasn't calling to apologize. She wasn't calling to explain why she hadn't looked for him in 5 years, or ask about the child she'd surely heard rumors about. She was calling because she was pregnant, and she didn't know what to do. If this story already pulled at something inside you, don't forget to follow Heartstories, where we share the moments that define who we become when love is tested most. Elias didn't answer the call right away. He let it go to voicemail and stood in the kitchen, holding Rowan's bottle like it was a lifeline. His fingers trembled. For 5 years, he had learned to survive by imagining she no longer existed. But now her voice, that familiar voice, had shattered everything he'd built just by speaking his name. When he finally listened to the message, it wasn't filled with regret. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the night she told him to pack and disappear. Just a tired woman asking for help. She said she was 42 and expecting, unexpectedly. She didn't want to terminate the pregnancy, but she was alone. The father was gone. Her health was fragile, her finances worse. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for something else. "Could I stay with you for a while, just until the baby comes?" Elias didn't respond for 2 days. He walked through parks with Rowan, pushing a stroller that had seen better years. He looked at other families and wondered what kind of person takes in the woman who once erased him. But Elias also knew what it felt like to be abandoned in a moment of vulnerability. When he called back, his voice was steady. "You can stay, for the baby's sake." She arrived by train the following week. She looked smaller than he remembered, both physically and somehow emotionally diminished. Her skin was pale, her clothes loose, her voice quiet. Elias didn't ask questions. He helped her up the stairs to his tiny apartment and set up the second bed in Rowan's room. At first, there was silence between them. They shared the same kitchen, the same hallway, the same air, but not much else. Elias took care of Rowan with practiced calm. He made his son's oatmeal while his mother sipped ginger tea across the table. She watched him with eyes that didn't know what to say. Occasionally, she'd comment on the baby. "He's very quiet," or "He looks nothing like you." Elias didn't answer. He wasn't raising Rowan to look like him. He was raising him to feel safe. She never mentioned the night she kicked him out, never asked about where he'd been, what it took to claw his way back from nothing. The past sat between them like a locked box neither dared to open. One night, she woke up screaming. Elias rushed to her room and found her clutching her stomach, in pain. The hospital ran tests and stabilized her, but warned of possible complications if she didn't rest. She'd need full-time help. She'd need someone to watch her carefully, someone she trusted. There was no one else. And so, Elias rearranged his life. Again. He took on fewer shifts, balanced Rowan's feeding with her medications, made grocery runs between diaper changes and prenatal appointments. He didn't do it out of duty. He did it because someone had to. Still, something gnawed at him. A name. During one of her restless nights, she murmured it in her sleep. Thomas? Elias froze. Squeeze. Thomas Keller. The name he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. The man who once smiled too long, who lingered after dinner, who smelled like leather and smoke and whispered things Elias had buried deep beneath silence and shame. Elias stood outside her door, heart pounding. He had to know, not because it would change anything, but because if the child she was carrying, if that child was connected to the man who... He didn't finish the thought. He just sat in the dark, holding Rowan, and wondering how many times a person can survive being broken by the same hands. The house had grown quieter, though not in peace, but in the way people grow careful when the air is heavy with something unspoken. Elias no longer needed to ask. He knew. Thomas Keller was the father of the child his mother now carried. The realization didn't arrive like a scream. It arrived in fragments. A name slipped during sleep. A hospital form filled out in half-consciousness. A phone call she didn't think he overheard, when she whispered, "No, he's not around anymore. It's better that way." Each piece slid into place, and Elias watched as the picture revealed itself. Painful, irreversible, familiar. The man who had cornered him at 15, who left scars that Elias never dared name aloud, who smiled in front of his mother and made Elias feel invisible in his own home. That man, she had chosen him, trusted him, built something with him long after Elias was gone. What hurt more than her silence was the way she pretended not to remember. Not the man, not the consequences, not the boy she'd lost in the process. One morning, Elias stood by the sink washing bottles when she walked into the kitchen. Her eyes were puffy, hair unkempt. Pregnancy had aged her faster than time ever could. She leaned against the counter and sighed like she expected him to say something. He didn't. "I know you probably don't understand why I'm doing this," she said softly. Elias didn't look up. "I don't need to understand. It's your life." But what he wanted to say was, "You understood enough to throw me away. You understood enough to welcome him in." She placed a hand on her belly. "He's not here anymore. Thomas, he left." Elias dried his hands. "People like him don't just leave. They disappear when it's convenient." That was the first time she looked at him, really looked. Not as someone who owed her or disappointed her, but as someone who might know more than she let herself admit. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know. Back then." Elias held her gaze. "You didn't ask." It wasn't anger in his voice. It was something colder, something older, resignation worn like armor. She didn't speak after that. She simply left the room. And from that day on, she never again entered the nursery. Not even once while walking out. Elias poured everything into Rowan and the baby growing inside her, whom he had already begun to call Hope, even if only in his mind. He wasn't sure if the name came from a desire to move forward or the desperation not to repeat history. As her due date approached, the tension settled like dust in every corner of the apartment. Elias stopped trying to understand her, and she stopped pretending she had the right to ask. At night, when Rowan slept in the apartment finally fell still, Elias would sometimes pull out an old shoebox of memories, his first photo ID, a weathered school certificate, a postcard someone once sent him during his shelter days. These were the scraps he used to remind himself he had lived, even when no one had wanted him to. And one night, he added something new to the box, a sonogram photo. left on the kitchen table by accident. He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe because he already felt responsible for the life it contained. Maybe because the child had nothing to do with Thomas, or his mother, or even Elias. But the child had everything to do with what comes next. The call came just after sunrise. His mother had been admitted overnight, blood pressure high, signs of preeclampsia, and contractions that came too soon. Elias bundled Rowan in his jacket and took a cab to the hospital in silence. The driver asked if he was nervous about becoming a father again. He didn't answer. The hospital hallway was cold, lit with flickering fluorescence and the low hum of machines. A nurse handed him a clipboard. "You're listed as next of kin," she said. "If anything happens, we need someone to authorize care for the baby." He stared at the paper, pen hovering. The irony wasn't lost on him. A boy once left with no signature, now signing for a child that wasn't his and maybe never would be. Still, he wrote his name, not because he was ready, but because no one else would. Hours passed. Rowan slept with his head on Elias's lap, small hand wrapped around one of Elias's fingers. Nurses came and went, updating him in fragments. Labor had begun. It wasn't going well. His mother was losing strength fast. When they finally let him in, she looked like a shadow of the woman he once knew, thinner, paler, drifting in and out of awareness. But when her eyes found Elias, something in her face softened. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered. It was all she could manage. Elias stood by her bed, watching her breathe, watching the monitors blink in slow patterns. He said nothing, not because he didn't want to, but because in that moment, no words could undo what had already been done. The baby was delivered by emergency C-section. A girl. Her cry was immediate, piercing, alive. They placed her in Elias's arms, wrapped tight in a hospital blanket. She was impossibly small, her face scrunched into a frown that made Elias laugh under his breath. She had a full head of dark hair and eyelashes so long they curled at the edges. When her eyes opened, they were the color of rain. The nurse asked if he had a name for the birth certificate. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Hope." The nurse smiled. "Beautiful. Is it short for anything?" He shook his head. "No, it's just Hope." She was transferred to the NICU for observation, but her vitals were strong. Elias visited her every 2 hours, watching her sleep under soft blue lights, her chest rising and falling like waves on a lake. No one else came. His mother remained in recovery, silent and weak. She hadn't asked to see the baby. She hadn't asked for anything. By the 3rd day, doctors said she could be discharged soon, but her body language said otherwise. One morning, Elias found a folded envelope on the tray by her bedside. It was addressed to him in small, careful handwriting. He didn't open it right away. He sat by her side, watching her avoid his gaze, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be anyone's mother. I never did. But maybe you can be better." Elias nodded. Not because he agreed, but because he didn't have the energy to argue with someone that already halfway gone. That afternoon, he took Rowan home and returned alone. Hope would stay in the hospital for another week. Before leaving, he placed a tiny knitted cap on the chair beside his mother's bed. It was the one Rowan had worn home years ago. "You never got to keep yours," Elias said softly. "Maybe she'll get to keep hers." His mother said nothing. When he walked out, he didn't look back. At home, he cleared out the hallway closet and made room for a bassinet. He bought diapers with money he didn't have, sterilized bottles late into the night, and wrote her name, Hope, on a strip of tape above the crib. He wasn't sure how he'd raise 2 children. He wasn't sure if he could, but what he did know, with more certainty than anything else in his life, was this: no child under his roof would ever wonder if they were wanted. Elias found the envelope 2 weeks later, wedged between a folded blanket and a box of prenatal vitamins he didn't remember buying. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No long confession, No poetic farewell, just a plain hospital document, aged and yellowing, and a note. You were 2 years old, Evelyn. I wasn't supposed to keep you. But when they handed you to me, I did. I couldn't love you the right way, but I never forgot the way you looked at me when you stopped crying. He read it 3 times, then stared at the line that mattered most. Biological parent unknown. She wasn't his birth mother. She had never been. Everything, the years of tension, the silence, the exile, came undone in a single breath. Elias didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just sat there in a room now filled with 2 sleeping children and let the truth settle like dust on a windowsill. He was a stranger to her before he was a son. And perhaps she had never stopped seeing him that way. Yet he'd spent years trying to become someone worthy of love she never knew how to give. The twist wasn't cruel, it was clarifying. She had taken him in and failed him. He had taken her back and forgiven her, without even knowing the full truth. Now, with nothing left to demand. Elias saw her not as a mother, not even as a villain, but as a scared, flawed human being who stumbled through someone else's life and left him standing in the aftermath. He folded the letter, placed it in a small wooden box beside other relics of his journey, Rowan's first drawing, Hope's hospital tag, and the name card from the shelter where he once slept. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He took out a blank card and wrote, "She didn't give me life, but she gave me a reason to protect it." He pinned the card above Hope's crib. Not for her, not yet. But maybe someday, when she asked why her beginning was tangled in silence, he'd have something to point to that wasn't shame. Weeks turned into months. Hope grew stronger. Rowan grew taller. Elias grew softer. Not weaker, but quieter, more rooted. He cooked dinners. He built bedtime routines. He taught Rowan to say please, and taught Hope to smile with her whole face. They didn't have a grandmother. They didn't have cousins or family photos or holiday traditions passed down through generations. But they had each other. They had warm hands, honest words, and a man who had once been discarded, now building a home that no child would be forced to leave. On Hope's first birthday, Elias didn't throw a party. He didn't invite anyone. He simply sat on the porch with both children in his lap, the sun setting behind them, and whispered a truth he had never dared believe until now. Maybe I wasn't born into a family. Maybe I was born to make one. And you, reading this, what makes someone your family? Is it blood, or is it who stays when others walk away? If this story stayed with you, follow Heartstories for more moments that remind us the most powerful kind of love is the kind we choose.